The rain didn't care about the cameras. It just fell. Hard, cold,
behind your back.
sideways.
My knees. Stop resisting.
And in the middle of it all,
My
in
hands
front of
are
a mansion
cracking.
with iron gates and floodlights cutting through the dark, two police officers slammed a 71-year-old man against the hood of a patrol car. His knees buckled, his cheek pressed into wet metal. His hands, rough, cracked hands that had mopped floors and carried mops for 34 years, were pulled behind his back in handcuffs. And standing on the mansion steps, wrapped in a cashmere robe, her hair wild from sleep, her face twisted with something between terror and fury, stood Della Voss, 29 years old, CEO of Voss Meridian Holdings, one of the youngest self-made female executives in Dallas, Texas. She pointed at the old man like he was a roach she found in her kitchen. "Get this disgusting old man away from me." The officers yanked him upright. And the old man, his name was Wendell Okafor, did not scream, did not curse, did not fight. He just looked at her, wet, trembling, eyes full of something she didn't deserve. "Miss Voss," he said quietly, "I only tried to save your life." She turned her back on him, and the police car door slammed shut. Now, before we go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever helped someone? Really helped them? Put yourself on the line? Lost sleep? Took a risk? And they turned around and acted like you were the enemy? Yeah. We've all been there. But most of us didn't get arrested for it. Voss Meridian Holdings occupied the top 14 floors of the tallest building in downtown Dallas. Glass walls, marble floors, the kind of place where the coffee cost $9 and the elevator played jazz. And somewhere in the basement of that building, at 6:15 in the morning, Wendell Okafor pushed his mop cart down Corridor B, like he had every morning for the past 11 years. Corridor B every morning. Same squeaky wheel on the cart, same flickering light above the storage closet, same rhythm. Wendell was not a man who needed noise to feel alive. He was 71. Widower, lived alone in a 2-room apartment in South Dallas, where the ceiling had a water stain shaped like Texas. He had a daughter once. Her name was Britta. She would have been 31 now. He didn't think about that before noon, if he could help it. The other cleaners liked Wendell, not because he was funny, though he could be, but because when your cart broke down, Wendell fixed it. When a new hire got yelled at by a supervisor, Wendell sat with them in the break room and didn't say much, but handed them the good biscuits. There was something about him, steady, quiet, present, that made people feel less alone. Nobody on the 14th floor knew his name. Della Voss had taken over as CEO of her family's company at 26, after her father, Rowan Voss, suffered a stroke that left him unable to speak. 3 years later, the company had doubled its value. She worked 16-hour days. She didn't take vacations. She didn't have close friends. Her relationship history was a short list of men who said she was too much, which she translated as, "I wasn't enough for you." She was not cruel. Not exactly. She just didn't have the bandwidth for people who weren't performing. And in her mind, everyone was always either performing or failing. The cleaners fell into the second category by default, not because she hated them, but because she didn't see them. That's a different kind of cruelty, isn't it? Voss Meridian's 15th anniversary gala was held on a Friday evening in the company's rooftop ballroom. Dallas skyline behind them, string lights overhead, 300 employees in their best clothes, drinking things they couldn't afford on their regular salaries, and pretending this all felt normal. Wendell was not invited, of course. But he was on duty. 3rd floor, cleaning the bathrooms near the service elevator, listening to the music drift down from above, like something that belonged to another world. Upstairs, the evening was already cracking at the edges, though nobody could see it yet. Colt Voss was 34, Della's older brother. Handsome in the way that men who know they're handsome usually are, square jaw, easy smile, The kind of laugh that made people feel special even when he was laughing at them. Their father had split the company's shares between them when he took ill. Della held 52%. Colt held 48%. 4%. That 4% had been eating Colt alive for 3 years. Tonight, he had decided, was the last night he would live below that number. He stood near the bar, champagne in hand, talking to a woman named Priscilla Holt. Priscilla was Della's executive secretary. Sharp, meticulous, the kind of woman who remembered every detail. She also owed Colt a favor, one she had been trying to repay for 2 years, and tonight he had finally told her how. "Just a wine glass," he said quietly, smiling at the crowd like they were talking about nothing. "Don't second-guess yourself." Priscilla's fingers tightened around her clutch. "And after?" "After," Colt said, sipping his champagne, "it'll look like an accident. Nobody questions an accident." Della was laughing. That was the thing nobody would remember later, that she actually laughed that evening. A real laugh, not a performance. One of her board members, a round-faced man named Eugene Tate, who wore the same tie to every company event, told a joke about quarterly projections that was genuinely terrible, and Della laughed until her eyes watered. For about 90 seconds, she was a 29-year-old woman at a party. Then Priscilla appeared at her elbow with a fresh glass of wine. "You look like you needed a refill, Ms. Voss." Della took it without looking, took a long sip, went back to smiling at Eugene. By the time the glass was half empty, she didn't know what was already moving through her bloodstream. 20 minutes later, she felt it. Not dramatically, not like the movies where everything goes blurry at once. It started small. A warmth behind her eyes, a slight delay between thinking something and saying it. She reached for a nearby table, and her hand missed the edge by 2 inches. "Just the champagne," she told herself. "You barely ate today." She set the glass down, took a breath, checked her phone to ground herself. That's when the call came in. Unknown number, but the voice was her cousin Garrett, speaking fast. "Della, it's Mom. She collapsed at the house. They're taking her to Baylor Medical. You need to come now." Della was already moving before the call ended. Wendell was pushing his cart past the lobby elevators when the doors opened and Della Voss walked out. He had seen her maybe a dozen times over 11 years. In the elevator. Once in the parking lot. Never up close. But tonight, he looked up, and something stopped him. Her walk was wrong. He'd worked night shifts in this building long enough to know what drunk looked like. But this wasn't drunk. Drunk was loose. This was something else. She was fighting her own body. Her heels were uneven. Her left hand kept reaching for walls that weren't there. She blinked too slowly, like her eyelids were heavier than they should be. "Evening, miss," he said instinctively. She didn't hear him. She pushed through the lobby doors into the night. Wendell hesitated. Then he left his cart and followed her. The parking lot was half covered by a valet awning, but the rain had started. Just a drizzle then, nothing like what was coming. Wendell came out just as Della reached her car, a black Porsche Cayenne. She was already pulling out her keys. "Miss," he said louder, "Miss Voss, I don't think you should be driving right now." She turned, and for a moment she just stared at him. This old man in a gray uniform with a mop cart logo on his chest. "Who are you?" she said. The words came out slightly soft at the edges. "I'm Wendell, ma'am. I clean the 3rd floor. I don't mean any disrespect, but you don't look right. You shouldn't get behind that wheel." She stared at him for a full 3 seconds. Then she said, very clearly, "Go back inside and do your job." She got in the car. Wendell stood in the rain. He should have walked back inside. He knew that. He was 71 years old, with bad knees and a heart condition, and absolutely zero authority to stop a CEO from doing anything. He thought about Britta. He thought about a night years ago when he hadn't followed. He walked to the parking lot exit and flagged down the one cab idling near the building entrance. "Follow that black SUV," he said. "Please." The rain went from drizzle to disaster in less than 10 minutes. And Della Voss was weaving. Not badly, not yet, but the Cayenne drifted twice across the lane markers on Highway 75, and at the exit ramp toward Highland Park, she braked so late that the tires screamed. Inside the cab, Wendell watched and his chest ached. The Cayenne pulled into a gas station. Wendell got out, paid the driver, walked to her window. She had the door open. She was sitting sideways in the driver's seat with her feet on the wet ground and her head in her hands. "I can't," she said, not to him, just to the air. "I can't think straight." "Miss Voss." Wendell crouched in front of her. The rain hit his back. "Let me drive you home. That's all. Just home." She looked up at him. She was going to say no. He could see it forming. Then lightning split the sky directly above them, and the thunder came half a second behind it, so loud it shook the gas station canopy. And Della Voss, CEO, hard woman, daughter of Dallas Money, flinched like a child. She moved to the passenger seat. Wendell got behind the wheel. He didn't know Highland Park well, but she managed to give him the address before the medication, whatever Priscilla had put in that glass, pulled her fully under. By the time he found the Voss family mansion behind its iron gate, Della was unconscious in the passenger seat, breathing steady, pulse okay when he checked with 2 fingers on her wrist. He'd done basic first aid in a church volunteer program years back, knew enough not to panic. He found her phone in her coat pocket, tried to unlock it, couldn't. The security guard booth at the gate was empty. The storm had apparently sent the overnight team into a secondary shelter on the property. The gate itself was slightly ajar. Wind, probably. Wendell drove through. He got her inside. Took him 20 minutes, and every bit of strength his knees had left. He found a sitting room just off the main entrance. Wide couch, throw blanket folded over the armrest. He laid her on the couch, removed her heels because they were digging red marks into her ankles, pulled the blanket up to her shoulders. He tried her phone again, tried dialing 911, but wasn't sure if that was overreacting. She was breathing. She was safe. The storm outside sounded like the end of the world. He found a kitchen, drank water from the tap, sat in a wooden chair near the sitting room entrance, arms crossed against the cold because his uniform was soaked through. He was going to leave as soon as the storm eased enough to walk. He didn't mean to fall asleep. But he was 71, and he had just carried a grown woman through a flooded driveway in a thunderstorm. He was out within 15 minutes. 6:47 a.m. The storm was gone. The world outside was wet and gray and still. Della Voss opened her eyes. White ceiling. The sitting room. She was on the couch with a blanket over her, and she had absolutely no memory of getting here. Last thing she remembered, the gas station, the rain, a man's voice. She sat up. Her heels were on the floor beside the couch, neatly placed. Her blood went cold. She stood too fast, grabbed the wall, looked around the room. And there, in the wooden chair by the entrance, was an old man in a gray janitor's uniform, asleep with his chin on his chest. Della Voss screamed. It happened very fast after that. Security came running from the side entrance. 2 of them, big men, hands already reaching. And then, and this was the part that would haunt Wendell later, the front door opened. Colt Voss walked in. He was already dressed, hair neat. He looked at his sister, looked at Wendell, and his face arranged itself into something that was performing horror, while his eyes stayed completely still. "Della, oh my God, are you okay?" He crossed the room, put his hands on her shoulders, looked at Wendell over her head. Who is this man? He works at the company, Della said. Her voice was shaking. I don't know how he got in here. I don't know what Hey, Colt said loudly to the security guards. Get him out. Call the police. Wendell stood up from the chair. Sir, if I could just explain. You're done explaining, Colt said. He put his arm around his sister and turned her away from Wendell. And just before he did, just for 1 second, he looked back at the old man and the corners of his mouth moved. Not a smile exactly. Something colder than a smile. The police arrived in 9 minutes. The rain had stopped, but the driveway was still flooded, and the officers' boots splashed as they walked Wendell out with his hands behind his back. He didn't resist. There was no point. He just looked back at the mansion one time as the patrol car door closed. And somewhere on the property, Colt Voss poured himself a glass of orange juice and watched from an upstairs window. By noon, the story was everywhere. Not because anyone knew the full story. Nobody did. But because one of the mansion's security guards had filmed the arrest on his phone, and the clip had gotten out. 30 seconds of a gray-haired old man being pressed against a police car in front of a Dallas mansion while rain dripped from his nose. The caption someone posted it with was, CEO's estate. Janitor caught inside after company gala. Make it make sense. Social media finished the rest. By 2 p.m., Wendell Okafor had been called a predator, a kidnapper, a creep, and worse. His face was everywhere. His name, spelled wrong in most posts, was trending in Dallas. He sat in a holding cell at Dallas County Detention Center, with his hands folded on his knees. The other men in the cell gave him space. Not out of respect, they just didn't know what to make of a 71-year-old man in a janitor uniform who sat that still. He wasn't angry. He was tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix. He thought about Britta. He thought about the way Della Voss had looked at him in the parking lot. Not cruel then, just desperate. He'd seen that desperation and made a decision. He'd make the same decision again. That was the thing nobody would understand, he realized. He didn't do it for a reward. He didn't do it because he expected a thank you. He did it because she reminded him of his daughter. And he had not been able to save Britta. At 4 o'clock, a public defender with a coffee stain on his tie came and told Wendell he was being released temporarily. Insufficient evidence to hold him. But Della Voss had already fired him. The termination letter had been emailed to his personal address, the one HR had on file, at 11:30 a.m. Conduct unbecoming. Trespassing on private property. Termination effective immediately. 34 years of service. No severance offered. The boy who believed him. His name was Freddie Aston. 23 years old. IT support, second year at Voss Meridian. Grew up in Oak Cliff, worked 2 jobs through community college. Got the IT job through a referral program. Freddie had seen Wendell every morning for 2 years. The man always acknowledged him. Not just a nod, but actually said his name. Morning, Freddie. You look tired. Go home on time today. When the story broke online, Freddie's coworkers were all sharing the clip and shaking their heads. Freddie was quiet. Because he'd been in the ballroom bathroom at 9:47 the previous night, and he'd seen something. Not much. Just Priscilla Holt near the drink station, back slightly turned, hands moving in a way that didn't match the conversation she was pretending to have on her phone. It had registered as odd. Now it registered as something else entirely. Freddie found Wendell's home address through the employee database. Technically not his access level, but the IT guys had a way, and showed up at the South Dallas apartment at 7 that evening. Wendell answered the door in a robe, looked at this young man on his leaking porch. You're the IT boy, he said. Freddie Aston, sir. I think you're innocent. And I think I know where to start looking. Wendell looked at him for a long moment. Then he opened the door wider. Freddie Aston had one very specific skill that most people underestimated. He was patient. In IT, patience was the job. You didn't panic when a system went down. You followed the thread. You traced the problem back to its source, no matter how long it took. He sat at Wendell's kitchen table with his laptop and a cold cup of tea, and he did not stop working until 2 a.m. The official ballroom CCTV had been wiped. He checked that from his work terminal earlier in the day. The footage from the party had been deleted from the server at 7:14 that morning. Someone who knew what they were doing. But Freddie knew something they hadn't counted on. The building's CCTV system had been upgraded 18 months ago. The old backup server, a physical drive unit in the basement utility room, was supposed to have been decommissioned. It hadn't been. Budget cuts, then a facilities oversight, then nobody followed through. Old server, still running, still recording. Lower resolution, but recording. At 1:47 a.m., Freddie found it. He turned the screen toward Wendell. The footage was grainy. Timestamp, 9:51 p.m. The ballroom bar area. Priscilla Holt, back to the camera, leaning over a drink station. Her right hand moved to a glass. Della's glass, identifiable by the lipstick mark already on the rim. Something dropped. Her hand pulled back. Normal posture resumed in under 4 seconds. Then the camera caught something else. 6 feet away, almost hidden behind a support pillar, Colt Voss, watching. A small nod toward Priscilla when she stepped away. Wendell stared at the screen. He thought about the powder he'd noticed near the drink station when he'd circled the ballroom with his cart earlier that night. Thought he'd imagined it. Thought it was spilled sugar from the dessert table. He thought about the fake phone call, the voice claiming Della's mother had collapsed. He pressed his fist to his mouth. "What did they give her?" he said quietly. "I don't know," Freddie said. "But based on what you described, the reaction timeline, the disorientation, passing out within an hour, I looked it up. There are sedatives that work exactly that way. Odorless, dissolve fast, hard to detect unless you're specifically testing for them." Wendell was silent. "She would have crashed," he said. Not a question. "On Highway 75 in a storm? With that in her system?" Freddie shook his head. "She wouldn't have made it to Highland Park." The two men sat with that for a moment. Here's what Wendell didn't know until Freddie showed him the second piece of footage. A hallway camera. 8:33 p.m., earlier in the evening, before the party hit full swing. Colt and a man Freddie identified as Garrett Voss, Della's cousin, the one who'd made the fake phone call, talking in a stairwell. Low-quality audio. But Freddie had worked with audio files before. He ran it through a filter. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Her shares revert to the board on incapacitation or death per Article 7. Garrett, the board votes Monday. If she's not there, I've already spoken to 3 of the 5 members. Wendell sat back in his chair. A board meeting. Monday morning. He looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. It was Sunday at 2:04 a.m. They had 7 hours before the board meeting started. Freddie wanted to call the police. Wendell said no, not yet. Not without knowing who on the police end might be connected to Colt. Dallas Money had long arms. What they needed was to get the footage directly to the board, or directly to Della. Freddie tried calling Della's office line. Voicemail. Tried the company's general emergency number. Got a duty officer who took his name and said someone would call back. Wendell thought. "There's one board member," he said slowly. Dr. Eugenia Faircloth. She's been on the board since Della's father ran the company. Old woman. Sharp. She has a private number. I've heard Ms. Voss's assistant read it out once in the lobby. I only remember it because the last 4 digits are the same as my daughter's birthday. Freddie stared at him. "You remember a phone number you overheard years ago?" "I'm old," Wendell said. Not senile. He dialed. Dr. Eugenia Faircloth was 74, formerly of Howard University's law department, currently semi-retired, and living in a River Oaks townhouse where she kept 3 cats and a professional skepticism she'd spent 40 years sharpening. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Who is this? Wendell told her everything. He didn't rush it. He was clear. He named names. He cited timestamps. He referenced Article 7 by name. There was a long silence. Young man, she said, which made Wendell almost smile despite everything, because nobody had called him young man in 20 years. Send me that footage, right now, and be at the Meridian Tower by 9 a.m. Ma'am, Wendell said, I was recently fired from that building. You'll be with me, she said. Nobody stops my guest. The Voss Meridian Holdings Board meeting was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. on the 42nd floor. Colt arrived at 9:10, fitted charcoal suit, the relaxed confidence of a man who believed the hard part was already done. He'd spoken to the 3 board members he needed. He had the proxy documents ready. He had a corporate attorney on standby. What he did not have, what he had not planned for, was Dr. Eugenia Faircloth already seated at the head of the table when he walked in. She had Freddie's footage on a tablet in front of her. And standing beside her, in the same gray uniform, because it was the only non-robe clothing he owned that was clean, was Wendell Okafor. Colt stopped in the doorway. His face went through several things very quickly. What is he doing here? He said. This man is a criminal. He was arrested. Sit down, Colt, Dr. Faircloth said. Her voice was the kind of voice that had been in courtrooms and boardrooms for 4 decades. It didn't raise itself. It didn't need to. Colt sat. The other board members filed in over the next 12 minutes, 5 in total. They looked at Wendell with confusion, looked at Faircloth with caution. At 9:31, the door opened one more time. Della Voss walked in. She was pale. She hadn't slept. She was wearing a dark blazer, and she looked like someone who had been sitting in a room alone trying to reconstruct a night she couldn't remember. She stopped when she saw Wendell. Something moved across her face. Not guilt yet. Not there yet. Anger still had the wheel. Why is he in this building? Sit down, Della, Dr. Faircloth said. Same voice, same quiet authority. Della Satte. Before we discuss any company business, Dr. Faircloth said, we are going to watch something. She turned the tablet toward the room's wall-mounted screen and pressed play. The room watched in silence. The drink being spiked. Colt's nod. The stairwell conversation. The fragmented audio. Article 7. Incapacitation or death. Monday board vote. Nobody spoke. Colt tried once. That audio is completely unclear. This is absurd. Priscilla? Freddie said from the corner of the room, where nobody had really noticed him standing. Everyone looked. And then they looked at where Freddie was looking. Priscilla Holt was standing near the door. She'd arrived with the rest of the administrative staff. She had both hands pressed flat against her thighs, and she was staring at the frozen image of herself on the screen. Priscilla, Freddie said again quietly. It's over. She broke like a dam. Not dramatically, just her face crumpled, her shoulders dropped, and she started talking. Fast, everything. The favor she owed Colt, the money he'd promised her, the assurance he'd given her that Della would just be sick, not... She couldn't finish the sentence. Not dead, Dr. Faircloth finished for her. Is that what he told you? Priscilla's silence was its own answer. 3 of the board members were already on their phones. Colt stood up, looked at the door, looked at Wendell, looked at his sister. And then 2 Dallas PD officers who Dr. Faircloth had quietly arranged to wait in the hallway came through the door. Colt Foss?" He went still. "You have the right to remain silent." He didn't say anything. He walked out between the officers with his eyes forward, and his jaw tight, and his easy smile completely and permanently gone. 2 days after the board meeting, Della Voss drove herself to South Dallas. No driver, no assistant, just her, in a plain car she borrowed from a friend because she didn't want the Porsche to signal anything. She had Wendell's address from HR. She sat outside for 6 minutes before she got out. The building was the kind that had good bones and bad luck. 3 stories. Brick that had darkened from decades of weather. The buzzer panel had 3 broken buttons. The hallway inside smelled like old cooking and something floral. Someone's plug-in air freshener fighting a losing battle. 2nd floor, apartment 204. She knocked. He answered after a moment. Still in the robe. He looked thinner than he had at the board meeting. His eyes went slightly wide when he saw her, then settled. "Ms. Voss," he said. "Can I come in?" He stepped back. The apartment was small in a way that wasn't just about square footage. It was the accumulated smallness of a life lived carefully within its means. A man who'd worked for a company for 34 years and still had a water stain on his ceiling and medicine bottles lined up on the kitchen windowsill like little soldiers. Della stood in the center of the main room and tried not to show what was happening inside her chest. There was a bookshelf with paperbacks organized by color, because he liked the way that looked. A single armchair near the window with a worn patch on the right armrest where his elbow always rested. A small television on a second-hand stand. And on the wall beside the kitchen door, photographs. She walked toward them slowly. A woman in a yellow dress, laughing, caught mid-spin at some kind of outdoor celebration. A younger Wendell, maybe 40, with his arm around a girl of about 7 or 8, who had his eyes and her mother's laugh apparently captured forever in that image. And one more. The girl, older now, maybe 19. Standing in front of a building Della recognized, not immediately, but after a moment. It was the Voss Meridian Tower. She turned to look at Wendell. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, watching her. "Your daughter?" she said. "Britta," he said. "She wanted to work in corporate law. She used to say she was going to walk into that building one day in a power suit, and everybody would know her name." He paused. "She had a car accident at 22. Rain, late at night, a highway she knew too well." The room was very quiet. "She never woke up," he said. Della looked at the photograph, then back at him. "The night I tried to stop you in the parking lot," he said, "all I could see was her. She didn't plan to cry. She genuinely didn't. But something about the size of the apartment and the medicine bottles and the photographs and the water stain on the ceiling, something about all of it together hit her somewhere that her 14-hour workdays and her board meetings and her performance of strength had never once touched." She sat down on his armchair without asking, put her face in her hands. She cried the ugly kind, the kind she hadn't done since her father's stroke. Wendell let her. He went to the kitchen. He came back with a glass of water and set it on the side table beside her. Then he sat on the edge of a wooden dining chair across the room and waited, the way a man waits who has sat with grief long enough to know it has its own schedule. When she was done, she looked up at him. "I destroyed you," she said, "in front of everyone, and you had just saved my life." He was quiet for a moment. "You were scared," he said, "and scared people reach for the nearest explanation. I wasn't angry." "You should be." "Probably," he agreed, "but I'm too old and too tired to carry that around." She almost smiled. It came out as something sadder. "I'm sorry, Wendell," she said. She said it plainly, without all the CEO language, without the carefully managed corporate phrasing she used for everything. Just the words, direct and bare. "I'm truly sorry." He nodded once. That was all she needed from him, and somehow she knew it. Della called a full company assembly for the following Friday. All staff, every floor, the main atrium. She'd never done it before. The whole company thing felt theatrical to her, always had. She preferred email. But this wasn't an email moment. 1,200 employees filled the atrium and the overflow corridors. She stood at the front with a microphone and no notes. "Most of you," she said, "saw a video of a man being arrested outside my home 2 weeks ago." The room was still. "You saw me point at him. You heard me call him disgusting. You watched security put him in handcuffs while I stood there in a robe and let it happen." She paused. "His name is Wendell Okafor. He has worked in this building for 34 years. He cleaned the 3rd floor. He fixed carts for the cleaning crew. He remembered every junior employee's name." She looked at Freddie Aston in the crowd. He gave a small nod. "On the night of our gala, as most of you now know through the board's official statement, I was drugged by someone in this company, at the direction of my own brother, who intended my death to look like a drunk driving accident. Wendell noticed something was wrong. He followed me into a storm. He drove me home safely. He stayed through the night to make sure I was okay." She took a breath. "And I had him arrested." She'd asked Wendell to come. He'd said he wasn't sure about crowds. She'd said, "I know. Come anyway." He was in the back, sitting next to Freddie, wearing a collared shirt Freddie had helped him iron because his iron had a scorched plate. Della looked out into the crowd. "Wendell," she said, "can you come up here, please?" The crowd parted. He walked through it slowly. His knees were aching. They always did now. He could feel 1,200 people looking at him, and it was strange. Stranger than anything he'd felt in years, because he wasn't a man made for stages or spotlights or crowds looking at him with anything other than the polite non-acknowledgement he'd gotten used to. He reached the front. Della turned to face him. And she did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She said, "I'm sorry, Wendell, in front of all of them. I am sorry." And then, because she was a CEO, and CEOs did not typically kneel in front of their entire company, she kneeled. The room went very, very quiet. Wendell looked down at her for a moment. "Get up, child," he said softly. "Please." She stood. The official announcement came from the company's legal team the following Monday. Effective immediately, Wendell Okafor was reinstated to Voss Meridian Holdings with full back pay, and a formal letter of apology entered into the company record. Additionally, and this was the part that the Dallas Business Journal would write about for 3 weeks running, Della Voss had transferred 15% of her personal company shares to Wendell. Not a symbolic number, not a token. 15%. Enough to make him, by technical definition, a stakeholder in the company. She also created a new position, retroactively, Honorary Chairman Emeritus, which came with absolutely no required duties. Only a standing invitation to any company event he wanted to attend, a car and driver available to him twice a week for medical appointments, and his apartment in South Dallas on a new lease with the maintenance costs covered by the company directly. The ceiling water stain got fixed on a Tuesday afternoon. Wendell stood in his apartment and looked at the clean patch of ceiling and felt something that he didn't quite have a word for. Not happiness. Happiness was too simple. Something older and more complicated. The feeling of a man who had held on long enough to see a thing turn around. At the end of the all-staff gathering, before the crowd dispersed, Della came back to the microphone. "One more thing," she said. The room stilled again. "I lost my father to illness 3 years ago. Not death, he's still here. But the man I knew, the one who taught me to read a balance sheet and to value work and to never let anyone in this city make me feel small. I lost that version of him, and I have been running this company since then, carrying that loss like it was cargo, refusing help, refusing people." She glanced at Wendell. I found out recently that the thing I've been looking for wasn't in a quarterly report. She smiled. It was the real kind, the same one that had appeared briefly at the gala before everything went sideways. I lost my father years ago, she said, but it seems like heaven sent me another one. Wendell cried. The first time he'd cried since Britta's funeral. Not hard. He was not a dramatic man. Just 2 tears, one from each eye, which he wiped away quickly with the back of his hand. Freddie Aston pretended to be very interested in something on the ceiling. The rest of the room, 1,200 people, stood up. Not because anyone signaled them to, not because it was on any agenda, just because sometimes 1,200 people in a room all feel the same thing at the same moment, and standing is the only thing that makes sense. The employees who had shared the video of his arrest, who had called him predator and creep and worse in comment sections, stood with their hands together and their eyes down. Not everyone deserves a redemption arc, but sometimes they take one anyway. Outside the Meridian Tower, the rain that had been threatening all morning finally gave up and drifted north. The Dallas sun came through. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just light. The kind that shows up after a storm because it was always going to. And if you've stayed with us this long, if you watched this whole thing through, then you already know what this story was really about. It wasn't about the CEO. It wasn't even about the janitor. It was about the moment between knowing better and doing better. Because Della Voss knew better. She knew something was off that night. She had enough pieces to pause, to ask a question, to give an old man in a uniform one moment of dignity. She didn't, and it cost her everything before it gave her back something she didn't know she'd lost. 1. Don't confuse position with worth. Wendell had no title, no office, no rank, but he had character. And in the end, character was the only currency that mattered. We live in a world that confuses visibility with value. The people we overlook are often the ones holding things together. 2. Greed always overreaches. Colt Voss had power, comfort, influence. He had 48% of something extraordinary. But the 4% gap between him and his sister consumed him. That's what greed does. It takes everything you have and makes it feel like nothing. Then it takes you with it. If this story hit you somewhere real, somewhere quiet, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm this kind of story matters. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop in the comments. Who is your Wendell? Who is the person in your life who shows up quietly and never gets the credit they deserve? Write their name down. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we tell stories like this every week. Real ones, human ones, the kind that stay with you. We'll see you in the next one.